your notes say on your agenda. I am switching up my presentation a little bit to have some of that more data related topics for tomorrow. But this topic is mainly about how to make your lives as easy as possible throughout that very busy season. Everybody's generally got a million things going on as soon as those plants are in the ground till the time that they're taken out. So these are some of the most helpful things that I think you can do to make your time as efficient as possible from install to extraction as you go through the season. I'll also be doing some switching between. I'm actually going to be doing some live mobile, so hopefully the technology cooperates with me, and actually some live demos on the computer as well. So first and foremost, this is a review for hopefully everybody, because everybody knows how to do all this all right. But before you go to the field, you need to make sure that you have some of these basic setup steps already complete. And that includes obviously having a username for yourself, the dealer, but as well as the grower that you'll be installing for, hopefully as a username already set up. You do all that from the login page. That can all be self-service for y'all. You can create your own accounts, create accounts for growers. And at the same time, you've hopefully got a boundary already created for them. So if you know where that sensor's going, you've got the field boundary drawn and you've got it assigned to the proper grower's username. So that's what those sharing settings are. When you get into those sharing settings, there's a couple terms that we usually use. One is owner, one is dealer. The owner is where you like to put the grower's permission assignments. One of the other things is making sure that you've got that crop and irrigation settings from that field. And that'll come into play if you want the insights to be turned on for you, which will be one of the cool features I think that'll help you out, that we'll talk about in a bit. So we've had some questions about this already. There was one of the questions on the Huva app already about knowing what the status of your sensor is before you're ready to go to the field. And to give a little more background and detail on the behavior of a sensor. So any CropX device is on all the time. So unlike some other devices you might deal with in the IoT world, there is no off switch. Okay. If you took the battery out, of course it's going to be off. It's unpowered at that point, but they are on all the time. So they're transmitting at their default rate, even if they're uninstalled and they're sitting on your shelf. So that's where Demry was actually talking about having some sort of a dashboard in the future where you could see the status of all those sensors at any point, even before installation. So that kind of answers some of the pre-install, is my sensor working or not? One of the other things to protect during a season, and this is really the only maintenance issue you should really ever have, is trying to keep rodents away from the cables and having a protective coating on those cables to reduce the likelihood of you having an issue in season. And of course, making sure that all your batteries are charged before you go to the field. Don't expect them to be charged fully. If they've been sitting on a shelf for 6 months, you need to do that within, maybe a month or so of being deployed. Of course, make sure that antenna is tight. I think we're going to have a lot less issues with that with this new design. And then just kind of a general overview, especially for those that might be new. I think that bottom bullet point there kind of gives you an idea of what you could generally expect to get done within one day. I think you can easily get 20 to 30 sensors in the ground a day. They're going to take 15 to 20 minutes a piece. Of course, that depends on drive time between locations. So hopefully this will come through. Here's a backyard install just the other day. My awesome wife was holding the phone for me. So this is putting a V4, one of the new CropX sensors in the ground. Yeah, that's some little bit glitchy. But the main thing to show here is how quickly this can happen. So I remember timing the video. This took 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And one of the other things I want to point out is the time I'm taking to evaluate what the soil looks like and feels like as you're drilling. So I look at that at about 2 or 3 different points as you're going through the ground. And then also the use of some water to lubricate the auger. It's not a lot that is needed, but the drier the soil, the more water you're going to need. That's a good general rule. One of the ways I apply it that's always been the easiest for me is just some little spray bottle. You can usually go a whole day and only go through about 1 or 2 bottles. And like we've mentioned already during the hardware times, this actually had some frost still in the ground. And as I was rotating the sensor in, I was applying a lot more torque than I ever would have with some of the previous versions. So that's definitely a testament to how much stronger this structure is compared to the older versions. And that's not only from the thickness and the taper design of the sensor, but also from how the flightings are designed. There's a little bit more of a curved edge as that spiral starts into the soil. So it's, it just goes through a lot easier. It's more like a screw that you're trying to drill into some wood. So that's the end of it. And like Demery mentioned, it's way better to put that in the ground without the antenna and then attach it once you're done. Two minutes and 30 seconds.
That sensors the key marks that we can set different sensor depths now. And I noticed that you left it in that display. Do we need to repack the top of that, I'm guessing? Repack the top of that soil?
So the question is about how do you treat the top of the soil if you're going to leave the sensor out of the ground a little bit? I don't think that's going to be necessary to do anything. Honestly, I just kind of brushed away the filings from the auger and left it. I mean, with the older sensor, I mean, probably especially in drier soils, I always felt like you had to put a lot of down pressure to make sure that you weren't going to be augering or loosening the soil as you were drilling that in the ground. I think that'll be less of an issue with this because of the flighting design. I think it's going to try to suck it down more. And without having that star, which can slip on the old design, I think you've got a lot better. You got more ability to try and make sure you're twisting it properly into the ground with the bar design. Does that help answer your question? The top of the sensor is oversized compared to the hole I was drilling. No, like I said, I think that the pilot, so the question is still about a gap between the edge of the sensor and the soil hole. The top of the sensor is larger diameter than either the auger I was using or the auger that would be in the install kit. So it's going to continue to tighten against the wall of that hole that you drilled as you continue further into the ground. So I don't think there's any gap in the samples that I've done so far. Good question. All right, so that's just the basics of like whatever you should do before the install, and you're in the field and you're actually putting it in the ground. But here's the important part that I probably want to spend the most time on right now is what some of the hardware guys talked about already. How to know if the sensor is working properly. And so the transmission confirmation process, there's three things that can happen after you scan that sensor. It's either going to tell you you're good to go. It's going to tell you that it transmitted, but for some reason we didn't have a soil measurement, or it's going to say it didn't transmit at all. So those are the three paths that can happen, right? And so when you scan that sensor, you're going to get one of these three messages within 6 minutes. Usually, if you're going to get the message that says that you're all good to go, it'll happen within a few minutes. And I'm actually going to go through that with a live demo here in a few minutes. So going to that second bullet point, if you're going to have a sensor transmit, but for some reason you don't have a measurement with it, that is most likely going to occur on all you folks that have gateways coming or new CropX telemetries coming. Okay, so if you have a disconnection between the third-party sensor and the CropX telemetry, of course, it can't read the sensor's information, right? So if you get that second message, you have a transmission without a measurement. What does that mean? It means I can't talk to the sensor for some reason, address it, check your wiring. So the text on this is very small, but one of the other improvements compared to last year was actually adding that middle option, as well as the text within the message. So it was a very generic message prior to this, where it would just say, hey, your field is ready, basically. But much of the stuff that dealers rely on to make sure that it really is indeed a good install and that there's no issue with the sensor is actually getting that message to include the battery level, as well as those initial volumetric water content readings from the sensors. So that message that you receive will have those pieces of information within it. So that's an important change from last year. So that was a big request to see that information as you go. Now, what happens if you get either of the two bad messages, right? You can try again, right? That's really what that boils down to. So when you tap on those notifications in your app, if you get the bad ones, that's just going to tell the sensor to try again. It's going to try and take a measurement and transmit. That's all you're doing when you scan the sensor. Your Bluetooth is telling the sensor to measure and transmit. And then you're waiting on the server to tell you what happened. So if you get those failures, you can try again. Basically, there's a third level to this series of events that can happen. Basically, you can just try a second time, or a third time, I should say. Now we get to switch our tech over to see if we can get the live demo to work. Audio. Okay, working. So we are going to demo those features that we were just talking about. And again, I'm hitting on this in very detailed fashion because I just want to make sure that everybody understands what that process is like, because that's a very critical time is making sure that when you're leaving the field that you're leaving confidently in your hardware. So the first thing that you could do prior to an install is the pre-install diagnostics. In that More tab, so that very bottom right-hand corner, there is a pre-installation button. And all that's going to allow you to do is scan the sensor, and then it will tell you some of the statistics about it. You have to be within Bluetooth range because right now it's communicating with the sensor. So it's going to give us three things. It's going to give us the last day it transmitted, what the current battery level is, and that we do have successful measurements from the pole, from the sensors that will eventually be in the ground. I do want to emphasize another improvement that Dimry and them worked on a lot with the new version of the app. So Bluetooth connectivity in general had been an issue for some. I mean, it could just be a little bit intermittent every now and then if you were trying to do an install or do a diagnostic in the field, in your warehouse, wherever. So the rate or the communication protocol within this new app improves that performance, so you don't have as many of those issues happening. I'm going to go ahead and do a live demo of the actual install process. So anywhere in the app, you've got this, we'll say this global action, this plus button. That's where you can add either a sensor or a record. You're going to choose the CropX type. If you're installing a third-party sensor, that previous screen is where you would choose what type of sensor you're working with. I could search which field I'm in, find it. So I'm adding an installation to that field specifically. I'm not located within this field, but I'm going to drop a pin. And that pin location is where that installation will register, and it's going to be defaulted off of your phone's location. So assuming you're going to be standing in the field that you're installing the sensor in, it's an easy just click through to make sure that that's the proper location. Once you scan the QR code, you can put in a few of the settings, including the sensor nickname, the installer name, and then there's two new pieces of information you can add to the installation this year, and that is the soil type and the moisture level. So those are good pieces of information for you to collect, especially if you're in a dry climate. It's good to know what that profile is like at the time of install. You can also put in some notes. Once you click submit, now is when you start the Bluetooth communication process. So now we're in the process of telling the sensor to transmit. And no, this screen does not mean that you're all good to go. It just means that, hey, I was able to tell the sensor what to do. And now we're waiting on the server to tell us that we received the transmission. And I was timing this earlier. It took 1 minute and 30 seconds. So I got to come up with something to talk about for 1 minute and 30 seconds. So usually while you were waiting for that, that might be a good time to attach the antenna to either, my best recommendation is a fiberglass flag. So a lot of people have those already as a piece of equipment that they carry for their seed business or for field trials. You could also be preparing how to mark that sensor in order to come back and find it when it's time for extraction. The other thing that is very helpful, especially if you're in the field, is by default, you're going to get these notifications as a push notification, right? So that's all within the app. But for me at least, sometimes I miss push notifications. They'll flash across your screen and then they're gone, right? But what I don't miss is a text message being delivered to my phone because it's going to buzz my watch, it's going to buzz my phone. So I've got SMS notifications turned on in the app. And that's especially important during that install time because as I'm doing the other things that I need to do as I'm waiting for the sensor, as I know as soon as my watch buzzes, then I can take a peek and know that I'm good to go and move on. We'll move on and I'll let you know when that buzzes through. I'll switch back to the other device now. So one other housekeeping item. There we go. That slide was delayed. It's just making sure that you can get back to that sensor. Now, this is obviously most important in a tall crop like corn, but here's just a recommendation on how I would mark that. It's mainly finding a way to mark that location, mark that row out at the end of the field so that you can get back to it very easily. So in this example, with the red dot being the sensor, it's a couple towers in. It's a good thing to put multiple sets of flags on the outside of the field. All right, so now we're going to go into some of the things that I recommend as a some speed pro tips within the app. See if I can get this loaded on the screen here. There we go. We'll see how good I am at running a mouse on a different screen. There we go. Okay, so the first thing is taking advantage of the CropX insights. The Crop Metrics Legacy guys have been taught to provide that weekly recommendation. And what the insight can do is provide a grower with some sort of context of what to do on a day by day or week by week basis. And what that looks like is when you click on a field, if you're the grower, you're going to get an instruction essentially of how to proceed with your irrigation. That's hard. There we go. So in this case, you've got an irrigation recommendation under that CropX Insights area. So that's kind of up in the top right corner, and it's big and flashy. Like, what should we do? It says don't irrigate. If our sum graph was in a different position to where we were more towards that refill line, it would say, hey, you're safe to irrigate. Or if you were towards that bottom and it is time to irrigate, it would be instructing you to do so. The information that's underneath that helps the grower understand the why behind what it's telling you to do. So take advantage of that as a feature to aid your dealer productivity through the year. The next thing is the auto set points. And this was kind of put into really put into cruise control last year. So as soon as you would install a sensor, within the next few days, the app is automatically going to set those full and refill points, and they did a really good job. There might be some exceptions of when you might need to adjust those later on in the year, either up or down. But for the most part, that is a huge time saver, even if it's just trying to get through your installation season and give those growers an initial full and refill point. The next thing was a feature that was added last spring where you can actually change the full and the refill point directly on the graph. And if for some reason I needed to set this full and refill point manually, the best way I like to do it is click and drag these points directly on the graph. So when I went to my set points area, if you scroll down a bit, there's a place where it said edit on graph. And it, after you click that, it kind of puts your graph into a different mode, right? And when you click on someplace in here within the green area, it's going to drop some new points. And you can click and drag those points up and down to your desired level, and then click save to create your new set points. So instead of having to type in your full point and then kind of do some rough math on where you'd want your refill point based on a percentage, that is an easier way to get that done. The next thing on the list is probably my biggest time saver. When you're working, usually grower by grower, right? So if you're looking at sensors grower by grower, every week you might look at, I'm going to look at Bob's on Monday and then Ted's on Tuesday and, and Wayne's on Wednesday. As you go through that filter, it can kind of get cumbersome, especially if they have a lot of sensors of which ones you've looked at and which ones you haven't looked at. So one of the things that was added last year was the ability to right click on any of these cards and open that field into a new tab. So when I clicked that button, you saw there was a new browser tab that opens up here. So if I filtered to, some grower here, and then all of the fields pop up, I want to look at all of his fields at once. And think about what's happening in the background here. So as I go to field number 1 and I start evaluating and I start thinking about what I might need to tell him, what's happening in the background, those other fields that you already clicked on, they're already all loading for you. You're not going to have to wait on them because by the time that you're ready to go look at field number 2, it's already there. It's done. And so as you proceed through that process and go field by field, and so we got done with Bob here, so we can close all these tabs, and we're not having to reload our overview screen. Right. So one of those things, if I clicked on one of these fields, it's going to load it, and then if I went back to overview, it's going to try to load all that again. Right. But all this stays the same without having to reload that each time. So then I just go on to the next grower. It loads up those fields and we repeat that process. That's a very efficient manner to go through grower by grower. Next thing is a cool VO feature brought over from some of the crop metrics days. It's called a ruler. And this is just an easy way to measure the difference between 2 points. So for example, if we wanted to measure what amount of rain or irrigation infiltrated during this event here, I'm just clicking and dragging the box, and then it will show you those values. So we can't read it here, but it's going to show you the point A value, the point B value, and then the change between those two and whether it went up or down. So I find that extremely helpful because when a grower calls you up and says, well, how much rain did we get? Or how much did it rain? Or how much infiltration did we get from that last irrigation? That's an easy way to answer those questions without having to kind of do some mental math and look at those values individually. The last one is something new, and John already talked about it a bit, but I think showing a picture of it is probably one of the coolest ways to show how powerful this could be. And this is back on the map overview, and being able to choose those data sets that are displaying on the map altogether. So for a dealer, you're probably not going to have sensors in, half of the world, like in this example. So uh, your uh, your map elevation would be much lower. But if you zoom into a certain point where you can see all those boundaries, once you select the data set, um, and especially the imagery, like John was talking about, I don't know of a platform where you can view imagery over many fields all at the same time. Got to go one more time in. There we go. Now all the boundaries will populate. And I'll see if I can read that from here. Data set. Ah, there we go. I'll have to get glasses, I guess. Not that one. Oh, you know what? I bet I'm in an area where there is no imagery, and so I gotta go to a different place. There we go. There we go. Thanks, guys. Okay, so how cool is that? See field to field variability over across the whole farm? I think that's pretty cool. And especially if you can see what crops they are on top of that, we could change our label to crop type. We could change our label to any other data set. Now take that same idea and same approach, and then you bring in the machine data on top of that. You could see all of that at a whole farm level. That's pretty cool. Whatever you see here, so the question is about like, is there some sort of report that could be generated from this view in order to deliver that to a grower? I think that sounds like a good idea. The standard report types, as far as what we have as far as season reports for the sensors and stuff, would be the report types available now. Yeah, I'm sure Gates will talk about, the vision of some of these types of things later on this afternoon. Hmm. Yeah. So what he's talking about there is like those labels. If that label is a well, I guess either a number or a name, whether it's a crop type, you can sort the list on the left by those values and see the highest values to lowest values. So maybe you could do that with yield, right? Yeah. So the question is about whether or not imagery shows up for non-censored fields. And I think the answer is Yep. So the answer right now is that the sensors turn on that feature, but there's definitely future, we'll say product suites that I'm sure that would um, be available for non-censored fields. Does anybody else have any like really cool pro tips? Anything that they would throw in there? That I mean, I think that's a good hot list of ways to really make your time well spent during the season. I'm gonna get out of the demo here, and we'll be pretty much wrapped up. Okay. Um, Next up, we've got lunch. You guys have some Q&A?
We do have some questions here.
Okay.
First one is, when would you potentially recommend moving set points manually?
When would we recommend moving set points manually? I think that's a good question for the slides for tomorrow. But I think there's some general cases where you'd want to be careful. And the first one, first main one is in a dry climate. So if you're installing into a dry soil, the current way that auto set point is set is based on what it knows about the soil. And what it knows about the soil is, it's kind of one of those things where it only knows what it knows, right? So until you get an irrigation or rain event that would prove that field capacity is above the moisture level that we installed it at, it's not going to raise that full point. So one thing to keep in mind is if you installed into a very dry soil and you are not going to get rain or irrigation for a while, that might be a point where you might want to raise it, maybe 1 inch, maybe 1.5 inches above where that line was initially set. Another would be maybe some very compacted fields, some fields that are just very difficult to install or infiltrate irrigation into.
Then last question here, dealing with installations. Have you tried using WD-40 instead of water, and would that impact probe readings?
I have heard of people using WD-40. No, I have not tried it, and I don't think I need to. And I mean, maybe some people have a preference that they would want to use that, but I guess for me, water's pretty cheap and it doesn't get oil all over your clothes. So